So we had two objectives. One, to show to the American public that its government had a vision greater than the Vietnam War, that it had a vision of some kind of world order in which these upheavals could be avoided. And secondly, we had a strategic problem, which is to put the Soviet Union under pressure from our diplomacy. So this is why we open to China on the basis of substantial strategic considerations. And I had the honor of being the first American diplomatic visitor to China. And this is how the relationship began. And then, as Secretary of State, my instructions to my people was be sure to place America in a position in which we were closer to both China and Russia than they were to each other. That was sort of the basic strategy then. I'm talking about 60 years ago. Now, then in 1976, 5 years after the opening to China, the trade with China was less than the trade with the Central American country Honduras. There was next to no trade. Then in the next decades, that trade developed. There was the uprising in Tiananmen Square. And at that point, still the economic relations with China were minimal. And I believe the basic policy continued to focus on the strategic aspects. Then in the Clinton administration, it began at first with trying to include significant human rights element. And that did not get anywhere. So they went back to the view that the strategic relationship was first, and to the hope that a growing economic relationship would produce more significant economic, political compatibility. So today we're in a situation where China has an explicit political system which is not, which is based on a degree of central leadership, which is not parallel to what we believe to be the correct political system.
Right.
So our question is, and the question you asked me, is it possible? What is the issue today? I think we have an elemental issue and a long-term issue. I would define the elemental issue as follows: that for the first time in human history, humanity has capacity to extinguish itself in a finite period of time. We have developed a technology of a power that is beyond what anybody imagined even 70 years ago. And that was the nuclear issue. And now to the nuclear issue is added the high-tech issue, in which in the field of artificial intelligence is in its essence based on the fact that man becomes a partner of machines, and that machines can develop their own judgment. So in such a world, a military conflict between high-tech powers is of colossal importance, significance. So on the one hand, it should be avoided, must be avoided. But on the other hand, we must maintain the convictions that made America great, and that I experienced in my youth their significance to oppressed people around the world. So how can we combine these two?
Right.
And that's with respect to the first. I believe we must be in constant dialogue with China. But with respect to the second, we must always affirm our principles. And we must not sacrifice them to simply tactical considerations. That's a very hard road to go. Because in the United States, when you have constant negotiations, which is what I believe is necessary, the public then thinks there is no strategic problem. And then you may weaken yourself by neglecting defense. And when you neglect defense, you then invite other countries to assert their mounting competitive strength. So how is it possible to maintain a strategic posture and at the same time get into a conceptual dialogue with the, say, Chinese in this case, in which the Chinese are brought to understand what our red lines are and to respect them, but where at the same time we negotiate avoidable conflicts and, where possible, cooperative efforts. This is the complex task we have. Nobody has yet succeeded in doing it completely, because we usually err on one side or the other. But that is the essence of the relationship. That's the challenge the administration now has. I think Alaska was a good example of that, because it's not usual that in the opening statement of a diplomatic conference stresses all the disagreements. But it also has the advantage of showing where we are and what we need to do. So it's the biggest problem for America, the biggest problem for the world, because if we can't solve that, then the risk is that all over the world, a kind of Cold War will develop between China and the United States. And in the Cold War with the Soviet Union had no economic capacity and they had a military technological capacity, but it didn't have an elemental technological capacity as China does. But China is a huge economic power, in addition to being a significant military power. So it is a very challenging task for America. And it's important that we unite on that and don't divide ourselves into one group that is in favor of the moral aspect and another one that's in favor of the strategic aspect. The two have to be linked. So that's a long answer.
No, that was an excellent statement. Very, I think, realistically balanced and very wise. And I think you were faithful to our national values, but also made clear how much is at stake in managing this relationship in a way that doesn't break into open conflict, and to continue to talk to the Chinese. I arrived in the Senate in the late 80s, and I was right at the middle of the discussions about China during the Clinton administration, in which the president and the administration really fought to include China in the global, integrate China into the global economy, both for mutual economic benefit, but also, as you said, Henry, with the hope that it would create a more democratic China. So the fact that it has not created a more democratic China has today led some people to want to break away from the economic relationship. And I'm sure you agree that the economic relationship and the integration of China has not only been good for the Chinese, but it's also been very beneficial for us. And it's certainly the fact that it has not led to as much democracy as we hoped it would within China should not lead us to walk away from what you've described as a necessity of constant dialogue. We've got a few minutes left, and I want to ask you a question that is really much more strategic than about democracy. One of the things that you did brilliantly in the early 70s in opening our relationship with China was to work within the context of the tension between the Soviet Union and China, and to form both a strong Sino-American alliance out of that, but also to maintain a pretty decent U.S.-Soviet détente. Today, it appears that the Soviet Union, well, Russia and China, President Putin and President Xi are coming closer and closer together. And I wanted to ask you to reflect on how that may complicate America's desire to improve and peacefully manage our relationship with China.
Well, if China and the United States, if China and the Soviet Union are united strategically and politically, that creates not only a very large concentration of population, but also a geography that covers 3/4 of Eurasia, and therefore has a tremendous impact. And then to the extent that the United States, as it must, favors the peaceful solution of disputes and restraint in the use of pressures, that is a combination that is very unfortunate for this objective. And it existed in a way when we opened to China, except that at that time China was the junior partner of that extended relationship, while today it's the reverse. China has a large economy, huge population, but Russia is still a significant nuclear military power and has a population that's shrinking, but still very significant. So it cannot be in the American interest to drive the two sides together. And in terms of the historical experience, some of a significant part of the current Chinese Russian territory from China in the 19th century. So the national interests of those two countries have not in the past always coincided.
Right.
So for all of these reasons, if everything else could be worked out properly, it's not in our interest to force these two countries together and to develop a distinct policy for each of them in the United States that gives us a chance to permit each side to consider its own long-term interests. We have not had any diplomacy with Russia now for partly because of acts that the Soviets or that the Russians undertook with respect to the Ukraine and other neighboring countries. And those acts derive from the fact that in the mind of Russians, Ukraine has always been part of the Russian Empire, so that the mere fact of breaking loose is considered a chance. So Ukraine is absolutely entitled to its independence, and the United States properly supports that. But we have not explored the possibilities of conversations with Russia for several decades now, for at least a decade and a half, because the dangers that I described before affect Russia as well. And so I am not saying that diplomacy will always lead to beneficial results, but I am saying that if we are forced into confrontations, which we must be prepared to be in defense of our values, that we can say to ourselves that we've made every effort to achieve peaceful outcomes compatible with our values. And that effort has not thrived with Russia in recent years, importantly because of their actions, but also partly because of our domestic politics.
Yes, I agree. That's a great agenda, really, a challenge to this administration. And I'm quite taken with it, not only to continue the dialogue with China, but to try to restart in an honest way a dialogue that hasn't existed for quite a while with Russia. And it's in our interest to not have them unite with each other and in that sense against us. So, Henry, I'm afraid we've used our time. We could go on for hours. You're a real inspiration. Really, it's a blessing that you continue to be as not only able, but willing to share the lessons of your extraordinary life. And you're just a source of great wisdom for a lot of us.